Hello, my name's Peter Forster. I'm a psychologist and my main areas of research interest are meditation and mindfulness. And last year I published an academic article intended for new meditators or people who were just starting out on a meditation path. And it was about what can happen in meditation. You know, what is it like to meditate? What is the experience like? And where can it lead? And then I also added a brief mention that according to recent research and observations, we know that the experience of meditation isn't necessarily beneficial to everyone. Why might that be, and who should be careful? And I mentioned a bit about that, and I put a link to that article, the original article, down below here, if you want to get the details of that paper. However, it was an academic article and it was published in an academic journal, so they're not necessarily easy to find, and the academic style of writing is not altogether clear for most people to read. So I wanted to make this, to make what I hope is some useful bits of information about meditation available, particularly to, as I say, new meditators, people who are just thinking of getting started. So at the start of that article, I summarized the main benefits of meditating, and these include people start in order to improve their health, improve their well-being, often by reducing the stress in their life. Meditation has been found to be very helpful for that. To improve self-understanding, people want to sort of find out more about what they're like and explore that, and meditation is a very good way of doing that. And then there are some, probably a smaller number, who want to use meditation in order to seek what we call awakening or enlightenment, however that is understood. Now, to get these kind of benefits, you're probably going to have to meditate for quite a while, weeks, months, possibly years, to get that kind of benefit. Whereas the kind of things that my paper was about, and I'm going to describe here, are the kind of things that can happen actually at any point, from the early days of meditating right through to, if you practice it for years, these sorts of things can come up during a meditation. And that surprisingly is an under-researched area. So hopefully, this will kind of help an understanding and spread the understanding about what meditation is. So then, after giving some of that background information about the benefits of meditation, I then went on, talked a bit about my experience of meditation, and then I got on to the research that I did. Now, broadly speaking, within psychology, and it's particularly its research into mindfulness practices, but even more widely than that. There's a couple of main approaches, you could say. One would be to gather small amounts of information from large numbers of people, and then to make inferences from that using statistical techniques. Or, on the other hand, you can take a small number of people, or even just one or two people, and get very large amounts of information, often in the form of interviews or in-depth questionnaires and that sort of thing. And this study used that kind of a design. It was carried out during the time of the COVID lockdown in this country, in the United Kingdom. And so I was in the situation, I gathered a lot of information just from one participant, which was me. It was one of the very few kinds of research that was even possible during the lockdown, when we weren't allowed to, go out and meet other people. So quite difficult for psychological research, as you can imagine. So what I did was, over the course of 2 months, and last year, year before last, in fact, over 2 months, I meditated for 90 minutes every day. And that was followed immediately by 30 minutes of writing notes on everything that happened during the meditation. And again, that's a very unusual thing to do. Surprisingly, there's very little research of that kind. You'll find a few articles where people talk about individual experiences, but it's usually carried out sort of days or months later, and people's memory is such that a lot will get missed. So this was quite an unusual design, to actually spend time immediately after quite long meditations. 90 minutes is longer than average, I guess, to say what happened, to write down detailed notes about all the things that happened during the meditation. So then I would analyze, at the end of that period of 2 months, I then analyzed all of the notes that I'd got. Pages and pages of notes. There was a lot of it. And I used a technique called thematic analysis, for those who are interested in research techniques. And I then grouped it according to the main themes that came up during those meditations. And there were three. There were three main things that came up during those meditations. The first were thoughts and feelings about the meditation itself, often of a judgmental nature. So, for example, I would make a note that if all I'm doing is sitting here and thinking, can I really call that a meditation? That kind of thing cropped up several times. And not only that, not only just making that kind of a judgmental observation, can I really call it a meditation? I also noticed that, I made notes that I should be beyond such things. I've been meditating for over 40 years. Surely I shouldn't be having these kind of judgments anymore. Anyway, that was kind of very interesting and useful for me to notice what a major theme that was. And that was something that I actually later on used to correct, I think, the way that I was thinking about meditating. And it was very useful for that. Hope it will be useful to other people too. The second main finding, or group of observations that I made, was about changes in the sensations or the sense perceptions. Again, while I was meditating, or while I was meditating and shortly thereafter. And this category of experiences included such things as changes in the time perception. So, for example, time while meditating could seem to be kind of drawn out and far longer than I would normally experience it. Or sometimes it seemed to go by very, very quickly, just whiz by. And then there were even times when it seemed quite timeless, as though time itself had stopped, suspended, and had no sense of time whatsoever. So that was one kind of experience that happened. There were also some changes in sensation, such as objects appearing to be more vivid. The world that I was looking at seemed more intense. The colours seemed more vibrant, more intense, and so on. So there were a number of changes that happened during these meditations to sense experiences, and these are reasonably common. If you look in the literature, amongst those few studies that have been done, you will find changes in sensory perceptions, changes in thoughts about the meditation process. These are quite common. Perhaps less common is the third group, the final group of observations and experiences that I noted in this particular study. And these were about unusual states of consciousness. So, for example, during a number of the meditations, I had experiences of really quite profound transpersonal states, seeming to be kind of elevated out of the normal day-to-day run-of-the-mill experiences. Sometimes they were intensely blissful, sometimes like a deep peace would kind of grow, and that would be there through the meditation. So there were some quite profound changes in state, certainly out of the usual, sometimes called altered states of consciousness. And at the time when I was actually carrying out the study, I didn't have a particular framework within which to put these experiences. I just saw them as kind of interesting one-off experiences. But while I was in the writing up stage of this article, I did come across a literature actually from the Buddhist tradition, and it was about something called the jhanas. That word jhana is spelled Jhana. And it's about these profoundly positive states, particularly written about within the Theravadan Buddhist tradition. I'm not a Buddhist, I should add. I just read a lot and came across it. And they're not widely known about, I think. You will find one or two people now who are starting to write about them and put out YouTube videos. One that I would recommend would be an American psychologist called Lee Brassington. He wrote a book called Right Concentration, and I would recommend that if you want an introduction to these very positive states that can occur during meditation. And he's also put out some very good videos in YouTube. Other people have written about these states I've since discovered within other traditions, within the Christian tradition, the contemplative tradition. But again, very few and far between are the writings on these very positive states, which is a shame, really, because they are worth understanding better, and they are, very uplifting states. I think, the idea of the concept of psychological growth, I think, is very relevant in considering these states. So, as I say, these three types of experience, they're all the sorts of things that can happen, from beginners through to people who've been meditating with lots of experience and been doing it for years. They can happen at any point. So I think it is worth knowing about these things. I said I would briefly mention the fact that some people do have unpleasant experiences while they're meditating. That some are quite well known, obviously, boredom. Some people just do get bored while they're sitting there meditating, or a bit agitated, sort of a related idea. However, some people do have, more negative experiences that they can have quite unpleasant experiences. Thankfully, they're rare, as far as I can tell. I haven't come across too many in the literature, but some people do, unfortunately, experience distress while they're meditating. As far as I can tell, they mainly seem to happen on very long, very intense meditation retreats, at least a week, and usually more than that, where people are meditating many hours every day, probably from when they first get up in the morning, throughout the day, and sometimes even, late into the evening. They'll be meditating many, many times. That seems to be the main occasion. It's not the only one, but that seems to be relatively common. And it also, the very negative experiences seem to happen to people who have mental health issues of one sort or another, things like post-traumatic stress or severe anxiety or things like that. But at any rate, that often also is a factor. But it's worth knowing that it can happen, which is why I mention it. And I think if it does happen to you during a meditation, I think you should just stop. On some of these meditation retreats, the staff they seem to be trained to suggest to people, if they have difficulties, just carry on, just work through it. And I don't know that that's always the best advice. In fact, I know that sometimes it's not the best advice. The best advice would be to just stop. Maybe leave the meditating until you've had a chance to reflect, talk to other people who have more experience. But I would suggest, if you're at all uncertain, just stop the meditation and don't be talked into trying to work through it. That's not necessarily the best thing to do. Anyway, it is, thankfully, some of these, the most unpleasant states are thankfully rare. Overwhelmingly, by far the overwhelming majority of people have very positive, useful experiences that help them, as I say, with such things as health and well-being in the longer term. It's also just worth reminding that everyone's experience is different, but I do hope that these, even though they just came from one meditator, will give at least a rough idea of some of the things that could happen while meditating. So for those of you who are on the verge of starting a practice or who are just starting out, I wish you well in your explorations. Thank you very much for watching this video.